Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi there, Maurice.
Hello.
Maurice, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Listen, we're at just about 5 o'clock. Let's see, we're still missing.
We're still missing somebody.
Give just a couple of minutes and we'll get started. And Norman, I like your background there.
Thank you.
You win the different award for the evening from the backgrounds.
Actually, I was using Colorado Springs at work because I was there over the weekend, and they find that was nicer too. So maybe I'll start using Colorado Springs as well.
There we go. Next meeting, right?
Yeah, next meeting.
There we go. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's 5:01. Danae, if you wouldn't mind taking the roll, please.
Yes, of course. Mary Kate Murin,
Present.
Max Starks,
Present.
Vicky Kraus,
Present.
yes. Samalid Hogan, Norman Roldan,
Present.
and Jeff Sadler.
Present.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and I appreciate it. And good evening, everyone. So, as you see on the agenda, we have a little shift in our agenda. Usually we go through our normal financial updates, but we really want to spend most of the time today really allowing time for our Building 20 discussion. We have a motion, today, and we've been speaking a lot over the last year and plus talking about Building 20 and what we were going to do. And so I really want to make sure we have enough time in this hour, dedicated to any questions, feedback, comments around Building 20 and the motion to the extent that the committee members feel comfortable voting on the motion that's going to come up later on today. So we're going to start a little out of order. We're going to start with our fiscal year 2021 fourth quarter trust fund report with John Tudrin, and then get in our Building 20 discussion. John.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And I'll keep this brief because I know there is a lot to get to. Just wanted to share the reason that we do need to run through the fourth quarter trust fund report is to be in compliance with our trust fund guidelines. We do present this quarterly, and we're presenting the fourth quarter now because we needed to wait for the financial statements to be finalized, for the audit to be finalized, which was just last month. So to give a very brief overview, the college does have 3 trust funds, and because they are trust funds, what it doesn't include is anything related to the state appropriation. It doesn't include grants or investment income, HERF funds, depreciation, things of that nature. So if I could ask you to advance to the next page. So this is our general education trust fund, and this contains most of the student tuition and fees and other revenues. And the revenues, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but the revenues are generally where we would expect them to be, considering the lower enrollment that we experienced last year. The expenses also came in under budget, in a large part due to COVID. And there was one thing that I did want to point out on this page is that on line NN, the construction and improvement of facilities reflects 0 expenditures. And it's not because we didn't spend anything, but similar to what we do for the revenue and spending report, is we always spend our rollover funds first. So this is just consistent with that same practice. If I could ask you to move to the next page. This is our health trust fund, and this contains primarily our allied health and nursing program revenues and expenses. And again, this falls pretty much in line with the lower enrollment. Expenditures are coming in under budget. So there's really nothing that was out of line on the health trust fund. And if I could ask you to move to the next, this is our capital improvement trust fund. And this is the revenue is generated from our capital improvement fee, and the expenses typically address important and necessary life, health, and safety issues. So again, our capital improvement fee revenue is down, consistent with what we just talked about. And the expenditures are, aside from the categorical waivers, there are no expenditures for the reasons that we discussed on the Gen Ed portion. So using the rollover funds. If I could ask you to advance to the next page. This is our vendor expenditures report. So this shows all of our vendors that have received $20,000 throughout the course of the year. There's a column that is labeled capitalize, and it is checked if we capitalize all or a portion of those expenses. And there's also a column that identifies DCAM funding. So some of those expenses may have been provided by state funding. And again, it could be a combination of local trust funds and state funds. And that is all I have, unless there are any questions.
John, you answered my only question, with the 0 expense. That looked odd, but thank you for going through that. I mean, there were strong results, obviously, of each one of the trust funds relative to our budget, so, and obviously I'm comfortable with this report here, so no questions from me.
Great. Thank you.
Any questions of John? Great. Thank you, John. Moving on to our Building 20 discussion.
Good evening, trustees. I'm quite excited, quite honestly, to be at this point with you. It's not by accident that I have behind me our last major capital project on campus. Building 19 was in fact the first major capital project in 30 years prior to that. And so the fact that we won't be looking at 30 more years before we do our next on-campus project, I think is reason to be excited. It's great to have a full committee here. We also have, and again, Trustee Hogan, thanks for joining us. And I see Trustee Lindsay with us as well tonight. Obviously a very consequential conversation. Really looking forward to sort of digging in and really leaving no stone unturned. So again, appreciate the time tonight. Joining, because again, there will be some other voices. We have Chris Scott, everyone, who I think a number of you know is our Dean for the School of Health and Patient Simulation. Chris, if you want to say a quick hi.
Sure. Thank you, President Cook. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
We also have our Vice President of Academic Affairs, Geraldine DeBurley. Again, many of you know her. Jerry, you want to say a quick hi?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Dr. Shay Butler, who is our Interim Vice President of Advancement and External Affairs, particularly in questions around foundation fundraising. Shay's here. Shay, you want to say a quick hi?
Good evening, everyone.
And then Deb Avery, our Senior Director of Facilities, again, who has provided a steadiness on so many of these conversations and will help with some real specifics if it gets to it with the building project. I'll say a quick hi.
Hi, everyone.
So we've got the whole team, everybody. We've got the whole team here. I like our chances with whatever conversation or area of discussion we want to get into. So I'll if we could tuck into the slide deck then. For our new trustees, just wanted to give a brief history and process to kind of make sure we've got a foundation underneath all of us. I sent my first letter back in 2017 to Secretary Pizer by the invitation of the Executive Office of Education. We had a flood and the issues that we knew in hand for that building really came to light. So it really started, certainly on my watch in 2017. We had between 2017 and 18, $2.5 million in emergency dollars that we had to spend on some significant issues that came up. In the meantime, we were moving forward with master planning. Our Board of Trustees approved a comprehensive campus master plan in 2019. The highest priority item in there was relocation out of Building 20. I think that really helps from a policy and a precedent standpoint to have focused our attention these last couple of years. In 2019, Ways and Means Committee helped support a letter that ultimately went into the project packet, although it didn't include a specific dollar amount at the time, but it did show trustee support for this. The result of all that process was that in 2019, as part of the DCAM, and again, DCAM is Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, that's a state agency that we are connected to, a major capital request to move all of the School of Health across to the Tech Park. We didn't receive notification, COVID, of course, until this past summer. We were not included in funding, and across all of public higher ed, UMass, all of the state universities and 15 community colleges, only 5 projects were awarded. We were unfortunately not included in that round, and the feedback we got was around scope, size, and cost. So that's really the context and the history there. I'll take the next slide, please.
Hey, John, just a little context there. So scope, size, cost, got it. But what was the exact feedback in terms of, is it too much money? Was it more the actual scope of the project was too big? What was this little flavor?
Yeah, and it was hard because we didn't get that feedback formally, Mac, or in writing. They don't provide that to those who submit and are not funded. So this was all verbal and sort of informal. The 54 million, I think, was a big sticking point. And there was some new construction in order to get all of the School of Health over there, because mind you, right, we're in 104,000 square feet right now. And even if we were right sizing that to get all of that across the street, that just seemed like a bridge too far. To ask for $54 million was too high a price tag, right then and there. So that really was a fundamental point of feedback.
Thank you.
As far as the rationale to revisit, again, the necessity, I think, again, you have a sense of how problematic the building is, but also from a program standpoint, these are some of the most mission central programs that we have. They're critical to our community and local workforce. And in some ways, even though enrollment is competitive, we can only take so many because of faculty-student ratios, because of the ability to get those students clinicals. They drive enrollment in different ways. So many of our general studies students aspire to get into one or more of these programs. And so there is a significant mission enrollment aspect to them. Again, we also know Building 20 is unreliable with a multitude of risks. There's in the industry speak, there's this term called a facilities condition index. It can't get any worse. For this building, 1.0 is as high as it goes. We've got a slide on that, which basically points out that renovation is not feasible, nor is it affordable. We've got significant risk of disruption anytime there are failures, and we have had some. You previously mentioned nursing offices twice were flooded out. Deb would know the numbers, but I think upwards of 400,000 maybe combined or one of those times. We also had dental clinic flood damage. We also have had, and our dean reminded me, some of our patient simulators damaged. There's just been a multitude of risk and disruption there. Again, the top 2 floors have not been used since 2005 because of the required asbestos mitigation. And we do carry still concern about the continuity of our programs. That's real cause for concern. I'll take the next slide. As far as some baseline statistics, over 700 students, about 100 faculty and staff, everyone, 13 associate and 5 certificate programs. Some of our notable community partners, Bay State, Trinity, Caring Health Center, long-term care facilities, other educational institutions. We have a 3+1, for example, nursing agreement with Westfield State. We're gonna hone in on this set of 3 programs right here, dental, and then OTA, which is occupational therapy assistant, and then PTA, which is physical therapy assistant. They host community clinicals on campus. They, in fact, invite their patients to come to them as opposed to the other programs where the students go out into the community and facilities for their clinical. We provide over 3,000 patient visits annually. So again, a little bit of baseline data on the programs. take the next slide. Back on this current condition piece, again, real brief. There, back in 2017, was a comprehensive study by DCAM of all of public higher ed. It's often referred to as the Sightline study. There's an inventory of all of our buildings and facilities, again, across all of public higher ed. We really sort of staggered the scale there, and this is where you hear the number about 315 million for the campus. But this building takes the lion's share, 68.4 million in deferred maintenance needs right then and there, and this was 4 years ago. And so that's again what generated that FCI of 1.2. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Nathanson, our CFO.
Thank you, and good evening. So we recently engaged Dietz and Company architects to do a safety assessment of Building 20. We just received an initial draft from them, a 91-page report highlighting the condition of many of the aspects of the building. And so tonight I just want to share a high-level summary of some of the things we see in that report. So before I get into some of the details, I just want to take a look at and explain the rating system that Dietz used. So first, they looked at risk categories, and these are categories that are similar to what DCAM uses. So the risk categories identify the time to repair or replace a system that's having an issue. So an A indicates an occupant safety hazard requiring immediate repair. A B indicates a system failure hazard also requiring immediate repair. Level C requires 1 to 3 years repair replacement, and then you can see D and E extend the time frame. So in addition to the risk categories, they also identified 3 different types of risk. So the first one is the risk of failure or injury, like what's the likelihood that there will be a failure? And they categorize those as high, moderate, or low. In addition to that, they looked at the impact of a potential failure on building use. So those risk levels are either requiring a full building closure, a partial building closure, or a repair that could be done while the building is occupied. And then they also looked at repair complexity. How would a repair impact other systems, either substantially in a limited way, or there would just be a single system impact? So even though the report looked at many, many aspects of the building, tonight I just want to highlight some of the systems that are impacted by the items here that are in red. So if we go to the next slide, please. So here what we're looking at is some examples. Again, these are just highlights. So in the box to the left, we see the items that are risk level A. So occupant safety hazard requiring immediate repair with a high risk of failure and a failure that would require full closure of the building. The systems that are in that sort of combination of categories includes water systems, waste and storm systems, chilled water piping, the sprinkler system, and restroom accessibility. And just noting that 4 out of those 5 bullets involve water. And we know that there's a history of failures of systems in that building that cause water damage. So just to point that out. If we go to the box at the right, we see still risk A, high risk of failure, and a potential partial closure of the building to do the repairs. And again, that would add to the original list, elevators and lifts, the fire alarm system, the need to replace air handling units, and the accessibility of ramps, doors, and rails. So this is just a small sample, but really the highest risk items that are in the report. So, this really emphasizes the need to vacate that building as soon as possible, just because of the high levels of risk here. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions about this.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Maurice. Or I'm not sure who was jumped in. Go ahead.
Unless Norman. How you doing,
I'm
everybody?
sorry, Norman.
That's okay, no problem. You could go ahead if you want. I'll go after.
No, I just wanted to clarify. I mean, these are examples of things that could go wrong. This is not their findings, correct?
This is their findings. So they brought in experts. They contracted with people who are experts in different systems. So plumbing systems, electrical systems, mechanical systems, et cetera. And each of those contractors came back with a very detailed report, including, if you look at the whole report, there are pictures and descriptions but this is really, this is just some summarized information based on a very detailed report.
But these are not their findings. They're not saying that the building is risk level A, high failure, full closure.
They are saying that these particular systems, so they are saying that the water systems are in this category of high risk, high risk of failure, risk A, full, if something went wrong, they're not saying to close the building, but yes, that is their
Something went
assessment of
wrong.
these systems.
They're not recommending, these are not recommendations. They're obviously saying if the water system failed, you'd have to close the building, but they're not saying that we need to close the building or that these things have been found. Yes, they could be imminent. We've had problems with them before, but they are in no way recommending closure of the building. These are things that could lead to closure.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
So this is really an assessment of risk, not, they're not saying to take action and close the building.
But I just want to be clear though. I'm sorry, it's Norman, but it is their finding though. It is a finding. They're not recommending of closing or they're not making recommendations how we're going to act as a school, but this is their finding.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, all right.
So it looks to me like we're operating this building on borrowed time, so to speak. Like something could go wrong at any second, and those 700 students will be without a program.
Exactly. That is what this is. That's the story that this is telling us.
Well, I see it more than that, and I'm sorry, it's Norman again. I see liability calls here. I see safety issues here. I see long-term of quality education being affected. I see more than that. I mean, I just don't see it as one thing. I see it as a bunch of things. And you're running more than one program there. So, it's more than that.
All very good points. Thank you.
If I could say one thing, we have had this experience. In 2018, the two dental faculty walk out of their office and a pipe burst above their head with hot water. And we almost had one of our electricians electrocuted. So we've lived examples of this where it has failed and we've had life safety issues. And I just want to share that there are examples that we've had these come to fruition in this building.
Absolutely, and I don't think anybody's arguing that building 20 needs a resolution, but I think we need to be extremely careful about citing these examples and this information and still continuing to operate in the building. And I mean, we need to be clear that these are things that could happen. We are aware that the building is in need of deferred maintenance, but have students in there and we're operating this building because we believe that there is not an imminent health safety issue in there and it's okay to have people in that building.
Yes, we have not been told that we need to keep people out of the building.
Okay.
This is really a story about risk, but not about, there's been, no one has told us we need to.
Right now we haven't, but as soon as you see a big risk, it could happen anytime where we have to then take action.
That
So
is true with any building, of course. But as Andrea was saying, the risk level on this building per the architect's review is much higher than say in any other building. Just the condition, the deferred maintenance, as Trustee Krause mentioned, it's sort of built up this level of risk higher to the point where there's very high risk.
Again,
Yeah,
I think all the assessments are correct and we're all moving in the same direction, but regardless of where we are today, even if we're successful in getting money from DCAM, we're not talking about taking any action steps likely for another year.
So I can help on 2 points.
Year, but we're talking about submitting a request and not hearing until June, and then you begin that whole process. So yes, these are things that could have happened in the building 6 months ago, a year ago. They can happen in 6 months, but I think we need to be very clear and careful. Our intention is to continue to operate this building. We think it's safe to have people in this building, and you know, that's going to continue under the best scenario for at least another 1 to 2 years. So this is good information, but I think we need to put it into context and perspective.
Let me try to summarize that, because those are great points, everyone. And of course, Andrea's been living this for 8 months. I've got about a 4.5 year head start on her. So let me just help. Correct. The state building inspector has not come in and said, this, and this are reasons why you have to close down. But we also needed to do our diligence on behalf of the board and the college. We had not done our own update on conditions since 2017. So we needed to know, heading into a year where we were hoping to populate the building, what was the current state of affairs. It just further shows the erosion of our confidence in those systems. So absolutely, we need to be mindful about how we message this. But again, you all have the sense, and we need to do that diligence for you to show you the conditions, the state of that. That is part of what we are trying to offer to all of you tonight.
Was this project commissioned or conditioned by DCAM, or was this something that we decided to do to see what the state of affairs was for this building?
No, we did this, Jeff. We had to take the initiative. We have, in fact, been help leading this. DCAM has been a partner all along, but they don't push individual institutions to stay on top of our own current maintenance issues.
Okay.
So let's look at the next slide. Was that you, Andrea? Let me see if it's me jumping back
I
in.
think that's you.
Okay. All right. So again, a bit of a layout, everyone. We shared a version of this at the last Ways and Means meeting. Again, just some of the aerial orientation. You'll see building 20 in the corner there labeled. We have building 27 when you first come in campus on your right-hand side there, where we would relocate what we call workforce affiliate programs, certified nursing assistant, CNA, and emergency medical technician, EMT in there. The tech park literally across the street, especially in what we call the NCAP, which is a vacant space, is really ideal for this public-facing program array, dental, OTA, PTA. And then again, building 13, which really becomes the new School of Health for us. It's got lower density students on campus and allows for more efficient space utilization. When we get into the Q&A, we're going to share a little bit more about why and how we've landed at building 13. But again, wanted to kind of give you an orientation about where on campus, and again, how that's being viewed by DCAM in particular. Take the next slide. Again, real brief, because again, all this is subject to the DCAM certified study design board process, and it sometimes feels a little bit like chicken and the egg. Let me start with the asterisks. Building 19 was done for about $500 a square foot back in 2016, just so you have some kind of a benchmark. In the NCAP, with about 25,000 square feet in the tech park, we're anticipating more like $725, and that's how you see the 18.5 million. For building 13, which is a substantially different condition than what building 19 was and what that NCAP is, we see that more like $450 a square foot. That's how you see we arrive at the 41.5 million. So again, a basic framing for our budget. Next slide. So just a little bit, we're going to just take a little bit of time here with Q&A. We knew that there would be discussion here. I'm going to actually have Chris handle the second bullet there around co-location, just give him a chance. But on the first one there, so is there a current or a vacant place on campus that could accommodate all of, as we call it, SHIPS, the School of Health and Patient Simulation? Honestly, the short answer is no. There are pockets here and there of vacant space, and some of them a little larger than others. But of course, what follows all those considerations is deferred maintenance, deferred maintenance, deferred maintenance in so many of these antique buildings that we have. And we have done this work for the last 3 years. We have been working with DCAM to look at on-campus options, which is ultimately proven not fruitful, which is why we had looked across the street. So the short answer again for that first bullet is no, we don't have current or vacant place on campus to do this. It begs the next question, why does the School of Health seek this co-location together? And again, our School of Health Dean shares that quite articulately. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, President Cook. I think one of the most important things is, as we've lived the NETCHI visit over the last year, each of our programs in the School of Health are individually accredited. And one of the biggest is that it's important for all these accreditors that oversee each of the individual programs is for professional education. And it's a keystone and requirement of each of our programs. And the best way that we've been able to do that, and we've been a leader in this, is through the use of patient simulation. What's really important is to keep these programs together so they can learn from each other and about each other's career, so that they become more understanding of each of the different careers. They get to interact and learn how to work with each other. What that helps for our community partners, and we get the feedback from our community partners, is the ability to cut down on their orientation and onboarding times, their ability to articulate, communicate, and understand how to work in the teams that they are working in today's environments is key. For instance, in nursing, we see a drop from 12 weeks to 8 weeks on the onboarding because of their abilities and what they've learned in the co-inhabitant model of working together in these spaces. Many times we're pulling a student or two out of a course, for instance, a respiratory therapist student, into a nursing sim and vice versa. That is being able to be accomplished by us being cohabitated in a space. And that's what's been extremely beneficial for our students, their learning model, and it's truly supported by our faculty. They have bought in, they use it, it's embedded within each of their curriculum, and the accrediting bodies really show that as a positive and a huge strength of our school. And that's something that we really should stick with.
Appreciate that. That notion of integration, everyone, is critical in healthcare. It's critical to healthcare education. So why does it make sense then to move dental OTA and PTA to the tech park? And again, I think I already shared that outlook, which is because they invite the community in, they have patients come to them. That facing aspect, if you will, is unique, particularly to these three programs. By having them in the tech park, parking is a good solution over there. It's on the first floor. It really does help address some of those types of needs that they have with inviting the community in. They really do nest together quite well. And frankly, when we also did what's called fit testing with the program needs and size, it maps well to that NCAP. So I hope that addresses that aspect of that question. Because again, we were trying to hear, pay attention, and listen to your questions from previous meetings. Last one on this slide anyway, what changed specific to building 13 and where is it now as part of this proposal? So a couple things. With the new administration, when they came in 2015, one of the things that they focused on across the Commonwealth was reuse and reallocation of existing structures. We knew even before COVID, building 13, which houses English, social science faculty in particular, building 13 was one of those buildings we would close in the summer in the name of trying to find some efficiencies on the energy side, what have you. So already there was a sort of less than use in that building. COVID has really exacerbated that. What we find is that there is this decreased need, request, or otherwise by that building in particular for in-person instruction. Yes, there has been a significant migration to online. We anticipate that in the future, but even if students opt back in, and we had a conversation before around this in no way will take away from what we can offer on campus. We have the ability in our other existing buildings to absorb those courses at different parts of campus. So there will be no slack, if you will. We just need to continue to invite students to that on-campus option. We'll see when they're ready to do that. So again, I do hope that that answers some of these questions right here. Let me pause and see if there are further questions or follow-up about this.
So just confirming that last point there, the programs that are currently in building 13 are going to be allocated to other buildings on campus?
Yeah, the short answer is there's no specific programs in there. There are no specific program labs, for example. We essentially offer classes in that building. By and large, it's what we call general purpose classrooms.
Right.
So there are no
there's
programs.
and offices for faculty and staff in that building, and there is space elsewhere on campus to accommodate the loss of classroom and/or faculty and staff office space.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. So I'll take the next slide. Andrea, I think this is you.
Sure. So I just wanted to provide some context for the funding discussion here. So first of all, state funding is really necessary for a project of this size. Without funding from the state, we just won't be able to relocate the programs out of building 20. We know that this current plan is attractive to DCAM. Dr. Cook spoke earlier about the reduction in size of the proposal. DCAM appreciates how this particular proposal repurposes and leverages the underutilized space in building 13 that we just talked about. And I'll just mention also that last week, I think we had a peer review meeting with DCAM. So we submitted a very early draft of our submission, and we did not receive any questions about the need to, about the proposal itself, about the content of the proposal. It's really, the only feedback we got was about how to strengthen the actual submission, but we definitely heard them trying to help us submit the strongest proposal possible. There were no questions about, do you really need to do this? Do you think this is going to work? Anything like that. So just to put that out there. Nevertheless, even though we do feel like there's support from DCAM, this is a competitive process, and it will be important for us to submit the strongest proposal possible. And one of the things that will make our proposal stronger will be a commitment of funding from trustees. That will really be critical in the assessment of our proposal. And I believe Dr. Cook pointed out earlier that in 2019, that proposal had a letter of support from trustees, but did not include an actual commitment of dollars. And so that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, asking for that commitment to really strengthen this proposal. Because this really is our best chance to obtain funding to relocate the SHIPS programs. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
And before we move forward,
Sure.
so earlier we talked about scope, size, cost, and I asked the question, what was the real meaning behind that, and it all came down to cost. It was too expensive. So it looks like here we have scope as the reason, as the lead for why it's attractive to DCAM, but it still has a heavy price tag. So what indicators do we have that the price tag isn't too expensive now?
That the price tag wouldn't be too expensive for DCAM?
Yeah, because it sounded like that's the reason why it got kicked out prior, because it was too expensive. It's still expensive. So, but you said earlier that you believe it's attractive now to DCAM. I'm just curious why you feel it's now attractive to DCAM, because it still has a hefty price tag.
Well, part of that is that I think they are excited about the Building 13 plan versus building new space across the street. So the idea that we're going to better utilize our existing space is something that's attractive to them. And we've also resized the overall project. And Dr. Cook, I don't know if you want to jump in with any other feedback.
Yeah, let me jump in too, is that I'm looking from 104 to 78,000. I mean, help me out. It's not quite 30,000 square feet, right? Reduction. So the scope is connected, I would assume, to the budget, right? If you're taking that times the whatever it's going to cost per square foot.
No doubt. And again, Matt, great question. I would say I'll try to be real specific. What's changed, even though the price tag 41 million is still a lot, it's not 54 million. And they view 41 as far more realistic for two reasons. DCAM themselves upped the top ask from 25 million to 30 million in this round. We also have a very specific commitment from the legislature in the form of 5 million, when before in the funding stack, we only had 20 million in there. We had 20 million in there, which they knew when we came to realize was clearly far too much of an ask from that body. So the fact that not only is it less money, but it is much more defined and doable, I think really carries water in DCAM's eyes. They really do like this Building 13 piece. They really do see, and they have been pushing all of public higher ed to reimagine and reuse. Again, I don't know that we've talked about it this way. These health programs are the ones on campus, trustees. These are the ones we are trying to preserve, that on-campus opportunity to do their lab piece, to do their patient simulation piece. The numbers that I saw for spring are the School of Health, Chris, forgive me for putting you on the spot again, is probably closer to 80%, if not 85% on campus. And so DCAM knows if you're going to have buildings in the future, public higher education, we want to know that they will be utilized. Chris, does that hold up?
It does. You're right on.
Great. Thank you for making those points clear. I just wanted to make sure that came out. It was kind of not as clear, but thank you.
So in terms of size and the things that we keep focusing on, which are scope and reuse, is it fair to say
Vicky, we lost you.
Duster, yeah.
We can see your mouth moving. We just can't hear you.
Today is 104,000 square feet.
We missed most of that, Vicky. Now
Yeah.
we had,
Sorry.
can you
Is
repeat that?
building 20 104,000 square feet?
Building 20 is 187,000 square feet in total.
Okay. So we're using 104 of that building. And the 78 that we're talking about includes building 13 and the 25,000 across the street.
Yes, and actually we're in more, I mean, there are, right, we had an electrical engineering robotics program. It's actually still in there. So I want to be clear, the School of Health in building 20 is 104,000. But yes, these two components now add to the 78,000. Yes. And again, our dean would say he really wishes we could have had 100,000 square feet again, but we just knew we couldn't afford that. And we really had to squeeze on this.
Right. So we're not shrinking the square footage that's allocated to the School of Health. We're just dividing it amongst two different locations, on campus and off campus.
No, we are squeezing them. From the 104, yes, to 78. We could, I say this with a smile to my dean. He and I might disagree on what right sizing means and feels like. There are things, for example, like in building 20, where there's posts that disrupt and take over. We have very wide hallways, for example, in building 20. So some of the lowering of the square footage comes from a better, more appropriate building to education that we can build out. But yes, we have sort of nipped and tucked in places to really try to lower the square footage.
Will building 20 be vacant? There will be no programs in there.
Yes, that is the idea, is this is a full vacancy, given obviously everything that you've heard about the concerns. We certainly could share more with you around how to navigate what warm mothball looks like and our hopes to demo the building.
That's fine.
Okay.
So is there anything else? So the only thing in building 20 is School of Health.
And that electrical engineering robotics program, Vicki, that I mentioned, but we will have, I believe, Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, relocated them out of the building by next summer.
And where are they going? Because that's not on the plan that we looked at.
Deb, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The project to actually relocate them will be next summer, so they'll be ready before the fall semester. And they are being co-located with another program, another similar program, which is currently in building 17.
So building 17 is what you said. That's really a STEM focused building for us.
And what are the costs associated? I mean, I know we're not talking about that, but we're talking about building 20 as though it only houses the School of Health. And clearly we have to move other things out of building 20 somewhere else. I assume that that's in a different budget somewhere because it's not what we're looking at here.
Yeah, that's the one last program. This electrical robotics program is the only other one, Vicki. And Deb, do you want to share the price tag on that? And again, it's part of the 3.1 million, if I'm not mistaken, that sort of facilities line that has projects in it. Go ahead, Deb.
Yes. Hold on one second. I want to give you the right number.
I don't want to guess, but I thought it was
I know.
$750,000.
I think we've got 850. Deb, does that
Yeah, I
sound-
was gonna say 800.
And that's funded in another line item, other monies that we get from DCAM.
No, that's funded with stick capital.
That's that facilities line, 3.1 million in our operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Take the next slide. Go ahead,
Okay,
Andrea.
so this slide is really comparing the funding stack in 2019 compared to the current proposal. And Dr. Cook already mentioned some of these things. So in total, we're looking at 41.5 million compared to 54.1 million in the last proposal. We're asking for 30 million from DCAM compared to the 25 million 2 years ago, Dr. Cook already mentioned that in the last proposal, we had assumed 20 million from the economic development bill. Now we actually have that $5 million in the bill itself, not vetoed by the governor, so that is more secure. The next two items, actually where it says stick debt, since the packet went out, I did a little more looking into that, and that was actually a mass infrastructure grant versus debt. But in any case, that the historic tax credits and the mass infrastructure grant were both related to the tech park, the 3.4 million and the 2.7. We don't have any of that in this proposal. Then we have the ask from trustees. 2 years ago, I believe there was an ask for 3 million, but that was not actually included in the letter of support, whereas now we are asking for $6 million in that letter of support and in the motion that we are presenting tonight. And then in the last round, there was no contribution from the foundation. At this point, we're asking for $500,000 from the foundation. They're in the midst of their finance committee and board meetings where they are considering this. There was a meeting last week with the executive committee who seemed very supportive of this contribution. So I will stop there and to see if there are any questions about that piece.
Yeah, so I guess just as a follow-up, the comment was made that we didn't submit the board's support of $3 million with the last 2019 proposal. Was that a timing issue? Did the vote happen after that was submitted, that it wasn't included in the package?
No, and again, some of us were here. I'd have to look to Mary Kate and Mac, Vicky, for the recollection. I think there was a little bit of a version of the board's appetite, Vicky, was we wanted to have the money from DCAM committed first before the trustees were willing to put a specific dollar amount on it. What we know actually in part of this process is you all might be the key that unlocks the project going the other way. DCAM is far more receptive to a specific dollar amount from trustees to then put their money on the table. I think that's what we've learned.
Yeah, that's also my recollection, Vicky, is that we didn't have even, of course, the 20 million from the legislature. It was kind of let's try to put the pieces together, given the project was so big.
I would agree with that.
And then can you talk a little bit about this tech park license agreement?
Yes, so in terms of operating costs, so once we move over to the tech park, we'll have a licensing agreement, which is essentially like a lease. We anticipate that will be an annual expense of between $250,000 and $300,000, post move-in. But we also expect that there'll be an offsetting reduction in operating expenses in building 20. So that will, lower the net amount of expense in total. But there will be a net operating expense for moving across the street.
So funding for the construction comes through DCAM to make the improvements to the end cap space. And then there is, on top of that, an annual lease payment that we would enter into, or a licensing agreement.
Exactly, yes.
And just out of curiosity, what happens if the tech park gets another tenant in between now and our timing?
That's a really good point. That actually is coming up on a I don't know if it's the next slide but to address that, so the tech park actually is feeling some financial pressure at this point. So they are actually asking us to pay something to hold the space for us. And that's something that we'll have to discuss. We think that between now and when there's a potential award, there might be something that we need to pay that we're in the process of discussing with them. Once DCAM takes over the project, we'd like to see DCAM actually paying for that, to hold that space. But again, that's something that we're aware of, and you're in the process of discussing with the tech park management and trustees.
And do we have a sense at this point on what that expense would be, or is it too early?
It's a little early. It will be less than what the normal lease amount would be, what the normal licensing amount would be. You know, they're looking at what would it cost, like what would a normal lease look like minus certain things that won't be happening if the space is not vacated. But I think that what they really need is just something to give them a comfort level that, you know, we're seriously moving forward. I think that will give the bank a level of comfort from their perspective. So, but that's something that I don't know that I can predict that just yet.
Yeah, and I think that's a negotiation point, right? Is that if we give them X a hold money, that we would apply that to future leases, right? That's all kind of wrapped up in a potential contract moving forward. Be a good way to kind of secure the space if they're in need of capital money or operating money. So good point.
There's this last piece here that I want trustees to carry some confidence on with the ask relative to the previous building 19 one. I know we'll get to it, but again, I want to give you some context. We already are in the tech park, trustees. We already do pay a significant licensing agreement. It's for our mechanical engineering technology, MET. It's essentially our core manufacturing program. We have 15,000 square feet already in the tech park. There's a not dissimilar approach that happened, I think, upwards of a dozen years ago, where we relocated that program. And we now pay about $175,000 a year in a licensing agreement for that program. So there is some precedent. We think we can do better, if you will, on a final deal than that one right there, given how much we are essentially bringing to the table for improvements of the space. But we do have another example. And essentially, a lot of community colleges in this day and age in Massachusetts have a version of a satellite. Essentially, ours is just going to be across the street. Andrew, if you do that last part, I think that will be helpful.
Sure. So the table at the bottom of the slide compares this ask for $6 million from reserves with the $3 million that was committed for the Building 19 project in 2016. So if we look at, so in 2016, there was an investment of $3 million. At the time, our unrestricted net position was about 13 million. So the $3 million as a percent of the 13 million was about 23%. If we look at where we are today, we have an unrestricted net position of about 24 million. So the $6 million as a percent of the $24 million is about 25%. So even though the dollar amount of the investment is higher, as a percentage of our unrestricted net position, it's a very, very similar percent. So I just want to stop there and see if there are any questions about that. I can also just add there that if we look at, instead of unrestricted net position, if we look at our total cash and investments, the percentages are also very similar. It's about 13.5% of total cash and investments compared to 15% now. So it's a similar, very similar, small difference in percents.
I have a question.
Data. Sure.
Now, the percent cost for build out for construction, right? New construction, meaning the redo of the buildings. That was done at what year did we take that number from? Because, the numbers vary on construction one year to another. When we did Lincoln and Brightwood, when we started construction there, it varied in the 2 years that we did that. So numbers were often up and down. So my question is, are we current to the construction costs today? Are we in the current construction when we did the study in the past?
Yeah, let me help with that, Norman, since Andrew, this sort of predates her. Again, you've got the baseline, right? The $500 a square foot is essentially sort of project completion at around 2018. So we're not too far off, right, from the 2019 example that we have for building 19. Obviously, costs have gone up a lot during COVID. What's hard about working with DCAM is we won't know ultimately the per square foot until we actually put bids out, go through their whole bid room world, deal with all that stuff, get certified, responses to all this. That's why in some ways we did err on the side of conservative. We might actually have some chance to beat these numbers, especially the tech park piece of that at $725 a square foot. Some of the other projects happening right now in public higher education are not coming in at those dollar figures. They're more in the 600 something per square foot range. But we just didn't want to undercut ourselves with this. Again, there's a lot of moving parts with all these things, but as much as we can dial these numbers in, they shouldn't be too far off right now.
Thanks.
Take the next slide.
So here we wanted to address some of the questions about funding scenarios. So, what is the likelihood that the project doesn't receive the full 30 million? What if DCAM awards something less than 30 million? Or, what happens if we don't receive any awards? So if we go to the next slide, and I'll just add that in the most recent version of the packet that went out, there's a spreadsheet, and I don't know that we'll necessarily we can decide if we want to walk through that, but I'll sort of answer these questions at a high level. So again, if we look at the next slide, first of all, we do think that if we are awarded some funding, we do think there's a high likelihood of getting the full 30 million. DCAM understands the need to get out of the building and the scope of the project. If for some reason we end up with less than 30 million, we looked at different scenarios about what could we do with different levels of funding. So we do think we need at least 25 million in order to vacate building 20. We just shared the funding scenario for receiving 30 million. If we, let's say, got 25 million, we could probably still move everyone out of building 20 according to the same plan, but we probably would have to pull some of the funding out of our regular facilities budget, maybe over 3 years. So 1 to 2 million a year over about 3 years. So it would probably total about $5 million. That's one scenario. And probably the only way we could fund the entire project with 25 million from DCAM. Once we get under 25 million, we're really at a point where we cannot vacate the building. We could potentially move dental and the rehab programs across the street. And that would still reduce the risk to those programs, in particular dental, which is more at risk. But the building 13 scenario, really, we wouldn't have enough funding to do that. So the programs, the nursing and simulation and all those other programs would still be at risk in building 20, and we'd still have all the same costs in building 20. So, a move at that point would be really to reduce the risk to dental. If we end up with a smaller amount, it's possible you can move dental without OT and PT. And again, you'd have the same problems in building 20. And of course, with no money from DCAM, we're really stuck. We'll just continue. It's essentially the status quo, and we'll just be continuing to throw money after repairs as they become necessary in the building, and the programs would continue to be at risk. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions about that.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for that. This is Max. So in the scenarios that you sent out later,
Sure.
after this went out, it actually showed what the impact to the $6 million ask would be for each one of these scenarios. And so it was good to see that there's no additional ask of the trustees over and above the 6, regardless of the scenario. So that was good to see in that layout.
Thank you.
Again, Mac, I didn't want you or this committee in particular or the full board to feel like there was still another number out there. So we know 6 is the ceiling. There is no other way. We will work within current constraints, quite frankly, to make this happen. But yeah, we really worked hard to make sure you knew that we knew that's the top.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Andrea, can you describe your scenario of spending if we get 25 million, 5 million out of other funds over time, and how that would work, and would that leave us short if other things happened on campus that needed funding for repairs or maintenance? Where is that $5 million today? How do we access it, and how does that really get spent over time on a project that has construction costs associated in a 12 to 18 month period?
Right. So it would come out of our regular, that 3.1 million annual facilities budget. It would basically require reprioritization of our needs. And, with total deferred maintenance over $300 million, Deb is constantly reprioritizing. And so at this point, we would be putting the move from building 20 at a higher level of priority, and then other things would have to wait. Essentially, we would be spending that $5 million over 2 or 3 years instead of spending on other things. And we would just have to figure out what the greatest needs were at the particular point in time.
How do we spend it over 2 or 3 years, though, if the construction project is a 12 to 18 month time frame? I mean, in order to complete either the end cap across the street or the move to building 13, we'd need those funds up front. We don't have the ability to, take 3 year. I mean, are we bringing that money forward and spending it in an earlier period so that we'll have less at another time? I guess I don't understand the timing.
That's a good question. So, and I might need to ask
John.
John.
I mean, again, we've got John Tudrin here, our controller, and John can help keep me honest with this, Vicki. First dollars will be state dollars. We're going to spend all the DCAM dollars first, ideally, before we have to spend trustee dollars or even these deferred maintenance dollars. So as we sort of almost encumber with you over a couple fiscal years, I believe we'll be able to use that type of a process, John, to sort of build up our own reservoir, if you will, to then apply that later down the road. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we also have the carryover funds currently. So we already, in some way, shape, or form, have a reservoir built up. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Okay, but I think it's important to note that we'd then be taking funds away from other buildings and other priorities on campus. It's not money that's just kind of sitting out there as excess. It means that other deferred maintenance and other items that prop up and that might need to be handled would be basically shortchanged. And if we take that money to meet the shortfall here.
I'm not sure that we're saying that it would necessarily be shortchanged. I think it's just not at the highest priority at this point in time. It's still a priority to find funding for those other deferred maintenance items, I'm sure. But it sounds like, to me, based on what I've seen, that this is just a priority at this point in time because of all the things we discussed tonight.
I agree. It's just that we have a specific amount of money that's allocated to us. So there isn't we can get it a little bit later from DCAM. They've said this is what you get, and how we spend it is our decision over what period of time. But there isn't other money out there. We would need to go find other money to replace that. But they have given us a finite budget. So if we use it for this, we're not using it for something else.
So let me try to clarify that. I see Andrew is going to help too. We're not talking about DCAM money. That allocation that they gave us over 5 years, we're actually talking about college dollars. And again, fully agreed, fully open-eyed, it would change the prioritization. It would squeeze other things. But by the way, that's what our emergencies have been doing already. I believe we've spent over the last 10 years an average of $1 million on some kind of an emergency issue. And so when we really reduce that footprint is how we hope to kind of thread the needle on the next 2 or 3 years so that we get out of that, at least with the building that's given us the most trouble that way. But I offer you this way. It's the rare community college, in this case, STCC, that has a $3 million annual line in an operating budget for facilities. None of our peers comes close to that. Again, some of it is the inheritance and the amount of facilities issues that we have. But that really is a place that we have some discretion over. We, as the collective college, that I think because by the way, it's not just for this example of 25 million less. If we go somehow 5 million beyond the budget, we're still expecting, by the way, DCAM will make that up, but we may need to have further internal conversations around how we try to somehow bridge, use deferred maintenance on some of the other enabling pieces of this.
Thank you.
I think it's important to point out, this is Jeff, that we're looking at this if DCAM does not come up with monies that we're looking for. And I think if we go back to what our commitment would be as trustees for 6 million to get the 30 and to get that. We still have one year to get it started, and another year and probably a year and a half before we even break ground. So this is probably a 3-year start to finish to totally vacate from building 20, and we still have numerous other programs that are, or budgets for other renovations that Deb and Andrea have shared with me that would allow us, I think, to have that kind of flexibility over the next 3 years. I don't think it's 18 months from now. I think it's 3 years to find that shortfall if we had to. I think that's important to point out.
That's a good point. Thank you. I think if we go to the next slide, we've covered some of the questions here. So we addressed if DCAM awards.
Andrew, before we go forward, we
Sure.
covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground, already. I think that sending it out as the pre-read was good. I don't think we need to walk through each one of these individual questions. I'll just ask the committee members: are there any additional questions that you feel like you want some clarity on before we move forward?
Yeah, I just have a couple, big surprise. What specifically were the recommendations that were given us in terms of strengthening our submission?
It was
To
really,
Andrea, yeah, and again, these are verbalized, everyone, right? Unfortunately, there isn't anything formal we can point to say there was a report given back as part of this debrief. It is sort of in that sense, but Andrea, go ahead.
it was really more about what data to include, how to, what kind of bullet points we should include in our executive summary. It was really more like process and like the quality of the presentation more than anything else. But they gave us some hints in terms of, what to include in terms of utilization data, or, it was really more technical kind of things. It wasn't really about what the overall project looks like and what the, what the final, like what would go where. They didn't have comments about that, but it was really more technical things about what numbers to put in what boxes, that kind of thing.
So formatting, kind of how to submit the presentation in the most
Right.
positive way.
Exactly.
If they had made any other recommendations. And then the only other comment that I had, and I had mentioned this at the last board meeting, is that if we are going to be looking at reallocation of space on the campus, is when this moves forward in terms of a feasibility study, which I believe is part of the DCAM process in terms of costs and everything else. I think we need to, we can't forget space for a potential bringing back cosmetology and or automotive. And so I think we just want to be careful that as we look at what's available on campus for space and what it's going to cost, that be taken into consideration at the time that these reviews be done.
And we do have a slide in later on that helps show you what is known on those two. Absolutely, we did not lose track of that, for sure.
It might be a good time to just walk through that quickly, John, since we're on the topic.
Sure. If we scroll, I think it's Keith who's running the slide deck for us.
I think it's the last slide.
Last slide.
Yeah, the very last slide.
And Andrea, if you and Deb want to just give the walkthrough.
Sure. So if we look at cosmetology, essentially the determination was that there would need to be a one-time investment of $1.9 million to do the work in building 27, to put cosmetology there where they had planned to potentially put it. So it's been $1.9 million. So $1.5 million of construction plus, about $400,000 for a certified study and other things. There would also be an operating expense of about $215,000 a year. So those are the costs of bringing back cosmetology. If we go to automotive, the one-time investment would be about 6.8 million. There's $6 million of deferred maintenance in building 25. And there'd be another $800,000 of program-related costs, certified study, et cetera. So, and then the operating costs would be about $260,000 a year. So that's really kind of the starting point around, what investment would be necessary in order to bring those programs back.
So these numbers were shared quite a while ago when the ad hoc committee, I believe, was put together to look at the programs that were cut and which ones would be brought back. Is that correct? These are the numbers that had been shared at that point?
Yes.
Yes.
These were the numbers that were, had not been discussed at any other time in terms of those programs in that decision-making process. So, one of the things that had been discussed at that point was delaying a decision on cosmetology and automotive to consider doing studies around these numbers and substantiating them, because they were certainly not things that had been previously discussed at Ways and Means or with the board. So I guess the good thing is that none of what we're talking about impacts building 27 or building 25, which I think you referenced was automotive. But it might be a good time for us to consider, if we're going to do a certified study, we should determine whether these dollar amounts are required and accurate in terms of bringing these programs back and our ability to provide these technical degrees moving forward. It doesn't involve any of the buildings, which is a good piece of news. It's not 13 and it's not 20, and it doesn't appear to be anywhere else we're talking about moving programs to. But I think that should be something that we might consider at the same time.
Absolutely, we're happy to. We can do a deep dive with this committee in particular. What we would do too, Vicki, is I would have Deb Avery share with you where these numbers came from and previous studies that helped identify the deferred maintenance piece and the specificity that we already have that undergirds that number. I would also have Jerry DeBurley talk about the programmatic aspects and what's needed in each of these to sort of restart them, particularly with automotive. We would want to share what does a contemporary community college automotive program look like from the program side of things. But we can do that deep dive when you would like to.
So on cosmetology, that 1.5 million was actually based on a preliminary certified study work that was done by one of our house doctors. So that's probably a fairly accurate number. If we wanted to confirm that, we could do the certified study, and the 0.4 million for that specific study came from a proposal that the house doctor had done for us to do that study. So those are pretty realistic numbers.
Debbie, just want to share for trustees what a house doctor is, by the way.
Sure.
Wonderful term of art.
I forgot we have some new people here.
What is a house doctor?
So a house doctor is actually an architectural or engineering firm that the state assigns to us. They assign, we actually have to go through an RFP process in order to make that selection. There's a designer selection board that from DCAM that runs the process and makes the final decisions. And then they give us a specific amount of money for each one of those firms. And there's no deadline on when it needs to be spent. And there's nothing that restricts when we spend it or how we spend it, other than it has to be on obviously a specific stick related project. So a house doctor, most of our house doctors right now, actually, we have 750,000 that was assigned to us. And we're actually about halfway through that. So we've actually had two other house doctors whose who went out of business. So we lose that money that was assigned to us for those house doctors. So we'll probably be starting another review for those soon.
Thanks, Deb. And again, as a reminder for new trustees, right? Any project with a price tag over 300,000 require some kind of a study, right, Deb? Therefore, this is the role that these house doctors, these engineering and architecture firms play for us. But the public aspect, the procurement process, I can promise you it's real, and Deb is certainly living it every day.
I just want to add that the cost of the certified study for, let's say, cosmetology would come out of our regular stick facilities budget. So it's not like it can be combined with the certified study that DCAM would do if they fund the Building 20 project. It would be its own separate study, and we would pay for that out of our $3.1 million budget.
Great. We can take this issue up at another time. I mean, it's nice to know that neither of these programs are in buildings that are potentially impacted by the other moves that we're talking about. And Deb, can you share with me the cosmetology report?
The certified study, there wasn't one that was done. There was some preliminary work that was done for the certified study, but it was never finalized because we put it on hold once the programs were set aside.
But did you mention the house doctor did some sort of work to get to this number?
I can share that with you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And then the other piece that's important to note here is if a project is over $5 million, DCAM needs to run that project. So the automotive would need to be a project that was managed by DCAM.
Okay, thank you for that, Deb. So like I said at the beginning of the meeting, we wanted to allow enough time to have the committee members ask questions. This is a motion that's going to be coming up that at least from my perspective, I think is pretty important that we'll be potentially bring to the full board. So I know it's 6:15 now, and we had a lot of questions here, good robust conversation. So we can go back up to the motion. Can we have someone read the motion unless there are any additional questions?
I can read the motion. The motion is that the Springfield Technical Community College Committee on Ways and Means, pursuant to the provision of Section 22, Chapter 15A, recommends to the Board of Trustees a $6 million increase to the General Education Trust Fund budget sources of funds and uses of funds by utilizing trust funds reserves. The funds will be used towards relocating the School of Health and Patient Simulation programs and offices currently located in Building 20. The use of the reserves is contingent upon receiving necessary funding from DCAN or their legislative support and may not take place until FY 2023 or later.
Thank you very much, Trustee Hogan. Do I have a second?
Second.
Great. Then would you mind reading the approval roll, please?
Yes. Mary Kate Mirren,
Yes.
Max Starks,
Yes.
Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Samalit Hogan,
Yes.
Norman Roldan,
Yes, I'm sorry, I was on mute.
and Jeff Sattler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Nene. Appreciate that. We have left on our agenda, we have our fiscal year 2022 financial update. I went through the update. I didn't have any questions. It looked pretty straightforward to me. So unless anyone else has any questions on that, we will move on to our next topic, which is old business. We talked about that with the cosmetology and automotive. And do we have any new business?
This is Jeff. I'd just like to, Mac, I know that I've been working with Andrea and with Deb, and what we talked about toward the end of our conversation. I believe we are going to be bringing all of the information on all of the projects we are dealing with to our Ways and Means Committee next month. Is that correct? Are we going to be on the agenda?
It will be
It's
January.
the next.
Yeah, trustees don't meet in December, Jeff.
Oh, okay. So January. So we will dig down deeper into all of the projects that Deb has to work on based on size and need, et cetera. And I think that will also help all the trustees appreciate the facilities and the work that has to be done. So there's a lot of work that's been done on it, and we look forward to presenting that in January.
Excellent. Thanks for the update, Jeff, and thanks for your legwork with that as well. We really appreciate that. Any other questions, comments? It's been, we run over 6:18 right now, but any other closing comments?
Just a small note of gratitude to this committee in particular. Thank you. This is a huge shot in the arm for this project. Your support is tremendous. And honestly, the vetting that you have all helped prompt has brought a level of excellence, quite frankly, to this. So again, just a note of confidence. The team at the college has been talking about this, work on this for a long, long time now, but your support makes all the difference. So again, great thank you.
Great, and thank you, Dr. Cook, for the work and the update here at this meeting. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Nene, we take the roll, please.
Yes, Mary Kate Murin,
Yes.
Max Starks,
Yes.
Vicky Kraus,
Yes.
Samalit Hogan,
Yes.
Norman Roldan,
Yes.
and Jeff Sattler.
Yes,
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nene. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
thank you.
Yep.